A modern-day high-rise corporate office in Seoul, with glass-paneled meeting rooms and sleek cubicles. The office is bustling with employees, but the air is tense due to an upcoming project that could determine the future of the company. Night descends on the cityscape outside, casting a shadow over everything happening inside. YN's fingers trembled as she paced back and forth outside the glass-walled conference room. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears as she glanced repeatedly at the empty space where her USB drive should have been. It contained every crucial piece of data, every proposal, every research document she and her team had painstakingly put together for the last 6 months. And now, it is gone. She glanced up at the towering figure of Jungkook, her boss, seated at the head of the long conference table. His posture was tense, lips pursed in a thin line as he discussed the project's progress with the board members. He hadn't noticed her yet, but he would soon enough. And she had no explanation for why the drive had vanished. Suddenly, Jungkook's eyes flicked towards her, a frown darkening his features. He raised his hand, stopping mid-sentence as he stood up. YN, his voice was low but laced with authority. The entire room fell silent, eyes turning towards her. Do you have the files? YN swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. I thought I had them. But they're not in my bag. I must have misplaced it. Misplaced it, he repeated incredulously, the tension in the room skyrocketing. He stepped closer, his towering presence making her feel impossibly small. This isn't just some casual office memo, YN. Those files were the backbone of our entire presentation, our make-or-break deal. I know, she whispered, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. I swear, I had it this morning. I don't know how. Excuses. Jungkook's voice boomed, making her flinch. Do you understand what's at stake here? This project is worth millions. Months of work, all of it, gone because you were careless. I'm sorry, Jungkook, Mr. Jaeon, I really am, YN pleaded, her voice cracking. Give me a little more time, I'll find it, I promise. Jungkook took a deep breath, his gaze steely and unreadable. Time's not a luxury we have. Do you even realize what you've done? The silence that followed was deafening. YN could feel the eyes of everyone in the room burning into her, judging her, blaming her. She could see the whispers forming on their lips. How could she be so irresponsible? How could she jeopardize everything? And then, as if a switch flipped inside him, Jungkook turned away, his tone cold and detached. You're fired. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her world spun as she tried to process what he had just said. Fired? Was he serious? Jungkook, wait, please. But he was already walking away, signaling the end of the meeting. One by one, the board members filed out, throwing her looks of pity and disdain. She felt her knees buckle, but she forced herself to stay upright. She couldn't break down, not here, not now. Her gaze shifted to Jungkook's retreat back. He had always been strict, always held impossibly high standards. But she had never seen him like this before. He looked hurt, disappointed, but why would he be so affected? Why would he care so much? YN sat alone in the empty office. The once bustling floor was eerily quiet now. She stared blankly at her desk, the scattered documents blurring in front of her eyes. YN. She looked up to see Vian, her best friend and colleague, approaching her. He had a concerned look on his face, his brows furrowed in sympathy. He took a seat beside her, his voice soft. Hey, I heard what happened. Are you okay? She shook her head slowly, her voice a broken whisper. I lost everything, Vian. My job, my reputation. And for what? I can't even remember where I last saw the drive. It's like it just disappeared. Vian's hand tightened on hers, his grip almost too firm. I'm so sorry, YN. But listen, maybe it's not too late. You know, you could go talk to Jungkook one more time, explain things to him. She laughed bitterly. He won't listen. I've ruined everything. He probably hates me now. Hey, Vian cupped her face, forcing her to look at him. Don't say that. He doesn't hate you. He trailed off, his gaze shifting uncomfortably. But YN caught it, the flash of something in his eyes. Something, dark, possessive. What is it, Vian? Nothing, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I just don't get why you're so hung up on him. I mean, he's just your boss, right? Why do you care so much about what he thinks? YN blinked, taken aback. I don't know. It's complicated. Vian's jaw clenched. He looked like he was struggling with something, some inner turmoil that was threatening to spill out. And then, before she could react, he blurted out. Maybe it's a good thing you're done with this project. Now, you can finally focus on what's really important, us. YN froze. What? YN, I've been by your side for years. I've watched you chase after Jungkook's approval, throwing yourself into work, ignoring everything else. Ignoring me. His voice dropped to a whisper. But now, it's different. Now, you don't have to worry about him anymore. The pieces started to fall into place in YN's mind. The strange way Vian had been acting lately, the way he would always steer conversations away from Jungkook, the subtle digs he would make about her dedication to the project. No. She breathed, horror dawning on her. Vian, what did you do? Vian's expression twisted into something almost unrecognizable. He stood up, his eyes flashing with a manic light. I did what I had to do, YN. For you. For us. You were too blind to see how he was manipulating you, using you for his own gain. I had to show you, I had to make you see. Vian, tell me you didn't take the drive, she whispered, her voice trembling. Please tell me you didn't sabotage everything. His silence was all the confirmation she needed. You, how could you? YN choked out, tears streaming down her face. You destroyed my career, my entire future, just because you were jealous. Jealous, he scoffed. No, YN. I love you, and I did this for you. Jungkook doesn't deserve you. He never did. Before she could say anything, a voice interrupted them. Step away from her, Vian. YN's head snapped up, and her heart nearly stopped. Jungkook stood at the entrance, his face a mask of fury. He looked like he was barely holding himself back from tearing Vian apart. Jungkook, YN began, but he held up a hand, his gaze locked on Vian. You thought you could get away with this? Jungkook's voice was dangerously calm. You thought I wouldn't find out? Vian sneered. You think you're so high and mighty, don't you, Jungkook? You think you can just waltz in and take everything, everyone, I care about. You're delusional, Jungkook spat. This was never about you. You put YN in the middle of your sick game, and for what? To prove a point. Vian's face twisted in rage. I did what I had to do. You don't get to judge me. And yet here we are, Jungkook replied coldly. You've lost, Vian. You've lost everything. With a swift motion, Jungkook pulled out his phone, showing the security footage he had obtained, footage of Vian taking the drive from YN's desk, slipping it into his pocket. YN's heart broke as she watched the evidence play out. All those months of hard work, undone by someone she thought she could trust. Get out, Jungkook commanded, his voice like steel. You're done here. Vian glared at them both, his eyes wild. But with a last, defeated look at YN, he turned and stormed out, the door slamming shut behind him. YN stood there, trembling, unable to process what had just happened. Jungkook stepped closer, his expression softening as he looked at her. The office was quiet, save for the faint hum of computers left on in the empty cubicles. YN stood awkwardly in the center of the room, her eyes fixed on the floor, as Jungkook paced a few steps away from her. He stopped suddenly and turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Jungkook, she started, but he cut her off. YN, don't. His voice was low, but it lacked the harsh edge it held earlier. Instead, it was filled with something else, something softer. You don't have to apologize. You did nothing wrong, but I lost the drive, No, you didn't. He stepped closer, his gaze intense, pinning her in place. Vian took it. He's the one who sabotaged everything, not you. YN looked up at him, confusion etched across her features. But you fired me. Why would you do that if you knew? Jungkook sighed, running a hand through his hair as if trying to find the right words. He looked almost vulnerable, a stark contrast to his usual composed self. I didn't want to fire you, YN. I never did, but I needed Vian to show his true face, to expose what he was doing. YN's heart skipped a beat. You set this up. You knew. He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. I had a hunch. Vian's behavior towards you, it's been off for a while. The way he'd act possessive, always showing up whenever we were in a meeting or just talking. I didn't want to believe it at first, but then I noticed files being misplaced, things not adding up. So I did some digging. YN's eyes widened. So when you fired me, I knew it would push him over the edge, Jungkook murmured, his voice laced with regret. I knew he'd come to you, thinking I was out of the picture, thinking he could manipulate you. I'm sorry I had to put you through that, YN. But it was the only way to protect you. Protect me, she echoed softly. Why, Jungkook? Why go through all this trouble just for me? Jungkook's gaze softened as he reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair away from her face. His touch was feather-light, sending a shiver down her spine. Because you mean more to me than just an employee, he confessed quietly. I've watched you pour your heart and soul into your work, into everything you do. You're brilliant, talented, and you make this place brighter just by being here. And somewhere along the way, I found myself caring about more than just your performance. YN's breath caught in her throat. She searched his eyes, her pulse racing, as if trying to see if he really meant what he was saying. What are you trying to say, Jungkook? I'm saying. He took a deep breath, his gaze intense and unwavering. I'm saying I've been in love with you for a long time, YN. I just didn't know how to show it. I'm sorry I had to do it like this. I'm sorry I had to hurt you. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. YN stared at him, her mind racing, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. He loved her. After everything that had happened, after all the misunderstandings, he actually. Jungkook, she whispered, stepping closer until there was barely any space between them. Why didn't you just tell me? His lips curled into a faint smile, a hint of self-mockery in his expression. Because I'm an idiot, and I thought I'd ruin things between us. You're too important to me, YN. I didn't want to risk losing you. You almost did, she murmured, her voice shaking slightly. I thought you hated me. I thought I could never hate you, he interrupted softly, cupping her cheek with one hand. His thumb brushed gently over her skin, sending warmth spreading through her chest. Even when I was angry, it wasn't because of the files. It was because I was scared. Scared that I'd lose you to someone else. Scared that Vian would take you away from me. YN's heart melted at his words. She reached up, covering his hand with hers. Jungkook, she took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I care about you too. More than I should, more than just as a boss or a colleague. His eyes widened slightly, hope flickering in their dark depths. You do, yes, she admitted, a small smile breaking through her tears. I was always drawn to you. I thought it was just admiration at first, but then, it became something more. Something I was too scared to acknowledge. Jungkook's gaze softened, a look of pure affection washing over his face. I'm sorry for everything, YN. I'm sorry I didn't protect you from Vian sooner. I should have told you how I felt. It doesn't matter anymore, she whispered. We're here now. That's all that matters. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Jungkook leaned in, his eyes searching hers for any sign of hesitation. But there was none, only trust, warmth, and something that made his heart ache with a bittersweet intensity. Can I? He murmured softly, his breath fanning against her lips. Yes, she breathed, her heart pounding. And then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, as if testing the waters, then more insistent as she responded, her arms wrapping around his neck. It was a kiss filled with everything unsaid, with months of tension, longing, and finally, sweet release. His hands cradled her face tenderly, holding her as if she were something precious, something irreplaceable. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. I love you, Jungkook murmured, his voice husky and raw. I don't want to hide it anymore. I want everyone to know. Hell, I want to shout it from the rooftops. YN chuckled softly, her heart soaring. You're such a dork, you know that. He grinned, the tension and stress of the past weeks finally lifting from his shoulders. Yeah, but I'm your dork. Yes, you are, she whispered, smiling up at him. And I love you too, Jungkook. I always have. With a soft laugh, he pulled her into another kiss, sealing their confessions with the promise of a new beginning. The chaos of the project, the betrayal, and the misunderstandings seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them, tangled up in each other's arms, finally at peace. Scene ends with Jungkook whispering softly against her lips, "Stay with me, YN. Not as my employee, but as someone I want to share everything with. Forever." And as YN nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears of happiness, she knew she had found exactly where she was meant to be, right there, with him. The next day at the office, YN stepped into the building with mixed emotions. Her mind was still buzzing with Jungkook's confession the previous evening and the fiery kiss they had shared. However, there was still unfinished business to address. She needed to confront Vian, the friend who had betrayed her out of jealousy. With a deep breath, YN made her way to Vian's cubicle, determination etched on her face. Vian was already at his desk, his expression guarded as if he knew what was coming. He glanced up, and his eyes widened slightly when he saw her approaching. "YN," he started, but she held up a hand, cutting him off. "Save it, Vian," she said, her voice steady. "I know everything." Vian's gaze faltered, guilt flickering across his face. "YN, I can explain." "Can you?" she interrupted, crossing her arms over her chest. "You stole my files, jeopardized my entire career, and tried to ruin my relationship with Jungkook. All because you were jealous." Vian opened his mouth, then closed it, looking down at his hands. I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. I thought if I could make you see that Jungkook wasn't good for you, you'd what?" YN snapped, her voice rising slightly. "You'd run to me with open arms. Do you know how insane that sounds, Vian?" He winced, looking up at her with pleading eyes. "I know, I messed up. But, YN, I couldn't stand seeing you fall for him. He's everything I'm not. And I thought that if I could just show you that he's not perfect, that he's just like any other guy who doesn't deserve you." YN shook her head, a mix of anger and disappointment churning in her chest. "You were my friend, Vian. One of my best friends. You didn't have to destroy my work to prove some twisted point." Vian ran a hand through his hair, frustration clear on his face. "I'm sorry, YN. I really am. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted you to know that I was wrong." She stood there for a moment, staring at him. Then she sighed, letting her shoulders drop slightly. "Vian, I'm not going to pretend like I can forgive you right away. What you did was beyond hurtful. But I need time to process all of this." He nodded slowly, looking defeated. "I understand." "Good," she replied quietly. "And for what it's worth, I hope you learn from this. I hope you find a way to deal with your feelings without hurting the people around you." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't closure, not entirely, but it was a start. Later that day, YN was summoned to Jungkook's office. She walked in cautiously, half expecting him to bring up the confrontation with Vian. But to her surprise, Jungkook's expression was calm, almost soft, as he looked up from his desk. "Close the door," he said gently. She did as he asked and took a seat across from him. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. "I'm glad you spoke to Vian," Jungkook finally said, leaning back in his chair. "He needed to hear what you had to say." YN frowned slightly. "You knew I was going to talk to him?" Jungkook nodded. "Of course, I was actually hoping you would. But that's not why I called you here." "Then why?" she asked, her heart beating a little faster. He stood up, rounding his desk to stand in front of her. "I wanted to explain why I handled things the way I did. Why I didn't just fire Vian the moment I found out what he did." YN's brow furrowed in confusion. "You didn't fire him, because of me?" Jungkook shook his head slowly. "No, I didn't fire him because I needed him to realize his mistake, to come clean to you on his own. If I had fired him right away, he would have left thinking I was just the villain of his story. Quote, he would have blamed me for everything. But now he's facing the consequences of his actions, not because of what I did, but because of what he did. He hurt you, and he needed to see that firsthand," Jungkook continued. YN blinked, absorbing his words. "So, you never wanted to fire me?" "Never," he murmured, reaching out to gently cup her cheek. "I wanted you to see the truth for yourself. I wanted you to know that I was on your side, no matter what." Her eyes softened, a lump forming in her throat. "Jungkook, I'm sorry I doubted you." He smiled faintly, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "You don't have to apologize. I should have been more honest from the beginning. I should have told you what I knew instead of trying to play hero." YN shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You are a hero, my hero." Jungkook's smile widened, his eyes sparkling with warmth. "Only if I get to be your hero forever." She laughed softly, stepping closer until there was barely any space between them. "Forever, huh, forever," he repeated, his voice low and serious. And then, in a move that was both gentle and possessive, Jungkook wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. YN felt her heart soar as she looked up at him, seeing the love and determination in his gaze. "I love you, YN, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she swallowed the lump in her throat. I love you too, Jungkook. So much. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a slow, tender kiss that spoke of promises and new beginnings. YN melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck as she poured every ounce of her love into the kiss. When they finally pulled away, both were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. I guess that makes it official, YN murmured, her eyes twinkling with happiness. You're stuck with me now, Jaeon Jungkook. Jungkook chuckled softly, his grip on her tightening. That's exactly where I want to be. Right here, with you. They stood there for a long moment, simply holding each other, their hearts beating in perfect sync. And as they stood in the middle of Jungkook's office, the world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them and the unbreakable bond they shared.